Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. I'm very excited to have two guests today on Better Teaching, Dr. Sarah Oberle and Mitch Weathers. They are the co-authors of Executive Functions for Every K-3 Classroom, Promoting Self-Regulation for a Strong Start. Sarah Oberle is an educator, writer, and professional learning designer with 18 years of experience as a primary classroom teacher. Her work centers on helping educators understand how learning happens and how that understanding shapes daily instructional decisions. Beyond the classroom, Sarah designs and facilitates evidence-informed professional learning for teachers and school leaders, both in person and virtually. She works with national and international organizations to ensure professional learning is research-informed, practical, and responsive to the realities of teaching. Her work focuses on attention, memory, and executive functions with an emphasis on pedagogy rather than programs. Our other guest, Mitch Weathers, is an educator, author, and nationally and internationally recognized voice on executive functions in the classroom. Mitch is best known for translating brain science into practical strategies that hold up in real classrooms. His work focuses on helping students strengthen skills such as organization, task initiation, self-regulation, and follow-through without adding to teachers' plates. Through his writing, speaking, and consulting, Mitch challenges us to rethink why students struggle and how intentional systems and structures can unlock their potential. Mitch's ideas give educators with a shared language, concrete tools, and a renewed lens for supporting our students. I think you're really going to like this one. Hello, Sarah and Mitch. Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Thanks for having us, Gene.
Been looking forward to this for a while. And just to let people know, Mitch and Sarah have a new book coming out, and we'll talk a lot about that. But the other thing I want people to know is that if you have an Alexa and she'll tell you when it's coming, just ask when Sarah's book's coming. Yeah. So that's exciting stuff. So, so you have a book that you wrote together, and then you have your first book on executive functions. Is that right, Mitch? For grades 3 through 12.
Yep.
And Sarah is K3.
Yes. Correct.
Okay, great. So I talk to folks all the time who have co-authored books, and it's always interesting. There's usually a story about how the project got started, how you guys met. And could you fill us in a little bit about that?
I'll let you take that, Sarah.
Oh, okay.
She's the catalyst, Gene.
Okay. Yes.
For this whole project.
It's my persistence. So I heard Mitch on a podcast maybe like 4 years ago now. I'm not quite sure. And he can make the corrections. Talking about executive functions. And I was like, but talking about executive functions for tier 1. And I was shocked because I've never heard anybody talk about executive functions in the context of just general education. And so I was so impressed that I reached out. I found Mitch on social and reached out and heard nothing. And so I went on his website and I reached out to him via his website, and he finally made time to get back to me. At which point we, were going back and forth about his work. And I said, I'm a primary teacher and this is so extremely relevant. Even though I'm a gen ed teacher, this is, dealing with a lack of executive function development is a huge part of our day. And I said, we just need this content. So the two of us went back and forth for a couple of years there, and we did some other things besides EF work. kind of danced around it for a while. And then one day Mitch just called me up and said, I have an idea. I think we should write this book. And I said, I think we should do it. I think now's the time.
Is that all true, Mitch?
Yeah. Yeah, she left out a lot, Gene, but, you know,
those
are all the high points of the story.
So you guys start,
The other side to that, my experience with that, and she jokes about social, but it's true. I'm kind of notoriously a bit of a ghost on social. And I went back and looked at my messages and I was like, oh yeah, this person did try to contact me. So ever since then, I've been better about that. And I think Sarah can attest to that. But the other piece of all of this is when my first book came out, focused on grades 3 through 12, because that's really kind of been as a middle and high school teacher, as a practitioner, and then work with a program I designed called Organized Binder. Those grade bands, and third really being the youngest, I felt like I could speak to that as like my area of expertise and provide value in a very authentic way. And I didn't want to try to pretend that I'm a primary teacher or that I understand first grade or second grade beyond spending time in my mom's classroom because she taught second grade her whole career. But Gene, the overwhelming, like the first book was really well received, and that's been great. Lots of good work happening. But consistent feedback, like at every school, every district, every county, wherever we've done book studies, is, well, what about K-1-2 and K-1-2-3? Because that's such an inflection point. So that was like really like weighing heavy on me. And then one day I was driving to get my youngest daughter from school, and it kind of just clicked. Like, this book needs to be written. This work needs to be out in the world. I don't believe it is yet, and I know who I need to co-author this with, and that's when the phone call came. So
okay, great. So Sarah, you knew Mitch from his 312 experience. So just briefly, should have started out with this. What are executive functions? Okay, and then why the split? What did you notice that was missing from Mitch's work that you wanted to be sure that you covered in this book?
Yeah, I think the context. I mean, primary context is so different. And so the examples, the suggestions, there's a lot of extrapolation that has to happen to make it relevant for the little ones. And, I just really felt like we need someone who can speak directly to us about executive functions, who can explain them in a way that is relevant for us, that contextualizes it in a primary classroom and talks about what it would look like if there's issues in a primary classroom and how you might handle it. The other thing is, and this brings me to what are executive functions, they're cognitive processes, and there's a group of 6 of them. There's 3 core and 3 higher order. And the 3 core are most relevant for the primary grades. So we have working memory, inhibition, and cognitive flexibility. Now those are relevant for everybody, even adults, but those are the ones that are really developing during those primary years. The higher order are problem solving, planning, and reasoning. And those are the ones that you start to see develop like late elementary to middle school. So Mitch's book for 312 was much more relevant for older kids, whereas my students in primary, I'm not worried about reasoning, problem solving, and planning as much because they cognitively are not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, let's talk about if there was any overlap, because you both shared third grade. So is there as you went into the K3 book, was there anything that surprised you, Mitch, or that you really wanted to be in this new book?
My initial thought, and Sarah and I's initial plan, and the co-authoring thing's really an interesting process too, right? Because we're bi-coastal, there's all this stuff we had to figure out, how are we going to do this? But the initial thought was, okay, this book, we kind of have a roadmap, right? We have topics, we have chapters, and although it's going to change and evolve for the context of K-1-2-3, we'll use that as a starting place. And what was probably the biggest epiphany for me, Gene, early on was after I think, Sarah, was the first couple months of us writing and coming back and just there wasn't a flow, and we both kind of realized this isn't a roadmap, that this primary, this K-1-2, and speak to 3 in just a moment, like why it's in both. It's just so different that to try to take something written for the older kids in that context and make it somehow fit for the younger context, in particular around executive functioning, it just doesn't work. They're two completely different spaces, and yet there's a continuum. Like there is an actual shown, like research has shown the developmental continuum. So they interrelate for sure. And we chose, and Sarah, tell me if I capture this, but that 3rd grade is really kind of this inflection point for most learners where we oftentimes non-verbally just kind of assume or expect that students are going to start to become more independent learners, to start to develop some of these quote unquote higher order executive functions. But that 3rd grade classrooms that I visited some could skew and lean maybe towards 2nd, and that may be who the kids are in the room, it may be the teacher's style, or it could be trending and leaning towards 4th. So we deliberately chose to include it in both books. Did I capture that, Sarah?
Yeah, I think so. I think we wanted to acknowledge that 3rd grade could go either way. And so we wanted to include it, and we include examples from 3rd grade classrooms too in the book to say, like, here's what this might look like for you. But recognizing also that, some of them may already have really well developed core executive functions. And so in that case, the teacher can start to look to those activities that challenge, your reasoning, your planning, your problem solving, but knowing you can have a high class or a low class or everything in between or a combination, we wanted to give the option there.
And in addition, real quick, Jean, that executive functions are so highly variable. Mm-hmm. In one, let's just say it's a 3rd grade class, each individual student, you could almost span that, what you would think of like the quote unquote normal development of executive functions over a couple of years. You can have variability in learners. So that feeds into it as well.
You mentioned about different ability levels, and we all struggle in how to describe that now, but when you are teaching executive functions, are you teaching executive functions? Are you teaching it within the context of a lesson, an activity, et cetera?
Well,
Sarah, that was for Sarah.
That was for Sarah? Okay.
So thank you for that lovely question. I'm gonna twist it a little bit and just say that we're not teaching our kids executive functions. We are understanding that there's a broad developmental continuum. We are understanding their potential limits, and then we are adapting our environments, our instruction, and our routines accordingly. So basically, we are honoring what our students are bringing to us, but we are not trying to in any way improve or strengthen their executive functions. We are supporting what they have, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm just going to say administrator, there could be other people walking through your classrooms. If they don't know about executive functions, could they still say, wow, Sarah's doing a great job here. Listen, look at how she made these instructions so gettable for the kids. They can understand them. So could you expand a little bit on the idea of that executive functions happen we're doing that all the time, but I need to be sure in the classroom that I am honoring this where they come in. And so I need to make some changes in my procedures or how I run my classroom. Can you talk about some of those things that you have done yourself, and then as you're across the country, giving presentations that the teachers are interested in? Is
that for Sarah or me?
That's for Sarah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm going to jump in and piggyback on that, Sarah. So, Jean, if I understood that, like someone walks in, school leader, whoever, they don't know EFs. They're not thinking, like walking in with an EF lens on, and they walk into Sarah's classroom and they're like, wow, like this is going really well. Like, and I think I heard you say, like, how did you adjust the environment, your instruction, and what routines do you have in place that might help promote or support the development of EFs, even if I'm not really thinking about it through that lens? Yeah.
So what would somebody come in and see that was different than how you did it years ago, based on what you have learned?
Yeah. Which, a lot of it was through trial and error over almost 2 decades. So wouldn't it be nice if we could share some of this with our novice teachers and not have them spend most of their career trying to figure this out if they do? To an administrator coming in, no, they're not saying, wow, you really know a lot about executive functions. I could really see that you are preserving their working memory and you are protecting their inhibitory processes. Absolutely not. But what you will see is fine-tuned routines that are short and sweet. So I'm not going to give 5 steps. I'm going to give 1. And then once that's done, I'll give another one. You are going to see activities that are also chunked. So I'm not going to explain an entire activity and have you go do it. I'm going to have you get your materials out first, prepare your paper, then you're going to learn, then you're going to hear maybe what to do on the first two tasks of your independent activity or whatever it is. That within the activity, there might be different types of questions. So I'm not going to explain all of it. I'm just going to say, okay, we're just going to do this, this, and this, and then stop. So very deliberate pacing and very deliberate procedures that we're driving efficiency and we're trying to eliminate as much ambiguity as we can. Ambiguity in terms of what do I do routinely in the classroom, but also how do I complete this assignment? During instruction, we're using cues as a routine to orient attention. So I'm just saying eyes and all my students turn to me and they know that they're directing their attention at me. Or I say board and right away they know we're all going to look at the smart board for this time. I'm stopping very purposefully during instruction to check for understanding. So I'm just being very respectful of the fact that I don't want to make them have to remember a lot of content at any one time, a lot of directions at any one time. And I'm trying to make sure that whatever capacity they have from their working memory at the moment, working memory being, the mental space where you are not only holding information, but you're manipulating it. So doing some kind of sequencing activity or computing a math problem or anything that requires that mental juggling. I want whatever my students have available in their working memory to be used towards learning. I don't want them to be distracted with anything. I don't want them to have to use it to, prepare materials. I want to conserve as much of that as I possibly can for the learning piece.
When I think about what you had said previously, I don't know if it was before we started recording or at some conversation that we had, that what you're talking about in your book is tier 1.
Mm-hmm.
This is for everybody. All the students need to learn this to be successful in school. Something else that you talked about was that is kind of a corollary to whether it's tier 1 or not, is that it's not for special ed. It's just kids. It's who we are. And so having said that, as the kids move from grade to grade, what should you expect them to bring in? And I'll ask Mitch this, since you got the whole gamut now, what would a teacher see in a kid that said, ooh, they had Sarah's class. Their executive functions are pretty good, because I know you're solving problems for folks. Are they still hangover from the problems that Sarah had, or just different context, or?
Yeah, I mean, I refer to that as you've probably heard of the iceberg effect, where unlearned content, underdeveloped skills, things, they do compound from grade to grade to grade and gets bigger underneath, like the iceberg. So ideally, and that's one of the things we are pretty clear about in the book, is that the core EFs that Sarah's mentioning right now, if students are lucky enough to be in environments where we're being mindful of them and really supporting and creating both, and the reason I had mentioned environment, instruction, and routine, there's 3 kind of chapters on that, and looking at how do you practically do this work in the classroom, and it really is about preserving or protecting working memory capacity. But if I had kids coming into my upper elementary classroom that were lucky enough to be in Sarah's classroom, my hunch is, in some ways, and just go with me on this, is that they would know how to do school in a way, or have the ability to do school. And you see that, like for me, as I spent most of my career as a ninth grade teacher, and there was just a very clear distinction. And in my mind, it's an equity issue because most of us can do school. But as these executive functions start to develop, and then you get into the higher order where we're really looking at, and I think this is even true of core EFs, what I would be looking for in my upper elementary is behavior. Because although executive functions are cognitive processes, and we know in the brain, like geographically, where that's happening, and that's all fine and interesting, but if I'm a practitioner with 35 fifth graders showing up to my classroom, what I'm hoping to spot is the behaviors that manifest from the development of those executive functions. So when I say do school, it might look like, you can inhibit and stay on task in realistic chunks of time for your grade level and your age. You might know how to get and stay organized. You might be able to demonstrate goal-oriented behavior. Now, that's all curated with the teacher, but those would be the things that my assumption, my hunch would be that either they're going to get that pretty quick, or they might even have some of that on board when they're coming into my class.
So, Sarah, what are some of I know this is not a cognitive question, but what are some of the behaviors that you want your kids to exhibit based on the work that you do with executive functions? Is it a never ending, or are we gradually releasing part of it or gradually increasing from one step to two steps as you give directions, or?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think, like, in terms of by the end of the school year, can I just give the 5 different ways to do the 5 different tasks on the one independent activity? No, because my kids are 6 and 7, and I still don't think that they are ready for that. Some are, but many are not. I think as you go through the grades, the demands increase, and the expected independence is also increasing. So I don't teach kindergarten. I'm not, walking my students to the bathroom. So I expect when they come to me that they can handle themselves in the bathroom, right? And it's funny, I was doing a training, and I had preschool teachers in the training, and we were talking about teaching some of these doing school type behaviors that Mitch and I sometimes will say, like the hidden curriculum, things that we take for granted that we expect our students to know to do or know how to do because we just think they should. And that's not always the case. I had a preschool teacher say, I had to teach my students that they have to pull their pants up before they come out of the bathroom. And I just thought, I was so tickled by that, but I was like, yeah, I wouldn't think that, I would assume that they knew, or it wouldn't even cross my mind. But yeah, it makes sense. And same as, I've told Mitch so many times, my students, I'm always amazed that I have to teach them, before you raise your hand to answer a question, you have to have an answer in your mind. You have to have something you want to say. And so we have to be really explicit about these things. But in terms of, just their 9 or 10 months that they spend with me, certainly by now, but, I spend the first couple of months being really regular with the routines. So in that sense, we're like a well-oiled machine. I'm not still saying, don't forget, you have to do this, or I didn't say, or you're supposed to wait. They operate so well. They know what every cue means. So in that sense, they've got it, where they've practiced enough to know what the expectations are. And if I do see that there's things that are not going well in the classroom, then I know, okay, there's ambiguity there. I need to create some kind of routine, because then you have behavior issues, you have problems with independent work. So I think, to answer your question, I think throughout the years, you can expect students to demonstrate more ability to, self-regulate, which is really what executive functions come down to. They come down to your ability to exhibit self-control in service of finishing a goal, whether that be a test or that be getting dressed or, whatever that looks like for you in the moment. So what I think is good about, our two books is just the spectrum that you see of change. But I don't know, you're not going to see that in the span of one school year, if that's what you mean. Like I'm not expecting them to be reasoning and problem solving. I have to really appreciate the fact that they're developing on their own. I mean, they're growing, they're getting taller, they're developing in all aspects. So I can't expect to rush that. And I'm not trying to.
So I've heard you say before, Sarah, talking about expectations and that how students with less developed executive functions can look like a student who's just struggling with the content. And which the way we are, I don't know how you are in Delaware, but in California, Mitch, I see you shake your head, is that the teacher sends a referral. The teacher sends a referral for special ed. And if they don't know what you know, Sarah, we're getting a whole bunch of special ed referrals. So that's period. The other thing that I wanted to mention with respect to interventions or any of the other tiers, wouldn't we expect them to be doing the same thing that you're doing in the tier 1 classrooms with respect to executive functions?
You want to take that, Mitch?
Yeah, you would hope so, I would say, Gene, but oftentimes you get into the space of, or I think we'll back up a little bit. You would hope that you would want to see that if there's in a tier 2, tier 3, or on special ed, if there's a space that is where content is happening, where learning is happening, and it's maybe not a pull-out or a support class situation, right? So there's some teaching there. In the tier 2 and tier 3, ideally, like Sarah just mentioned it too, like, well, if I see something going on, right? Like I'd always refer to those with my students, like, almost like this, what's going on there? Like we have this very clear routine. We're all doing it collectively. We're doing it together. And part of that is you get to see modeled for you and you practice getting organized every day, just in little bits, And if you can't, or a few of you can't, like, is it with my routine? This is kind of like the EF lens as an educator. But more often than not, it's usually that red flag for me that I want to see so that I can possibly intervene. Could be handled in that tier 1 general ed core classroom space. Or it could be like, hey, there's something going on here, and let's address it in a tier 2, maybe in a small group, or tier 3, like kind of more targeted intervention, where that wouldn't so much be shaping the learning environment, because now I'm in almost a support or a coaching role, supporting that area of concern that's happening in the gen ed core classroom. And the truth of it is we can't tier 2 ourselves out of a tier 1 problem. And I have the privilege of working with a lot of districts and interacting with a lot of educators. And a really interesting conversation is always to start with, like, tell me about your tier 1 initiatives in this district or at this school, or even in my classroom. Like, what's going on here, that I could share with all kids? And it's not easy to point to those, because if you back up and kind of look at it from a 10,000-foot view, where the design of the whole thing is very siloed. Sarah has taught first grade for 20 years. I taught ninth grade for 20 years, and someone next to me was teaching 10th grade ELA, and you over the other side of campus are 11th grade history and your PE, and we have these spaces that are siloed, and what we're doing can be siloed. So to get collective about it and share those for all kids in the core space, it's got to be grade level and subject area agnostic. And that's where executive functions come in and play a really interesting and important role, because these aren't even academic in nature, Gene. These are, like you've mentioned, we do this all the time. And we all struggle with executive dysfunction, and we're in that progression. So there's something about the tier 1 space that's really important, because I personally, the way I frame it, and we talk about it in the book, is it allows for collective teacher efficacy. And if you follow the research, it has a significant impact and a very large effect size. So there's some interesting things to explore with executive functions in that sense.
And Jean, I want to make sure that your listeners are clear, or that we're being clear with the fact that we are not saying you are teaching executive functions, because like we said, we're not teaching you to get taller. That's happening at your own pace. What we are doing in the classroom is we are saying, understanding what we know about executive functions, here's what I can do to be mindful of the fact that you do have working memory limits. And if I exhaust them, I'm going to challenge you. If there's going to be behavioral problems, there's going to be academic problems, there's going to be stress. I understand that your inhibition is not fully developed and you are highly distractible. So knowing that, what am I going to do in my classroom to mitigate some of that? The third core, cognitive flexibility. If I understand that you are mid-development in your ability to understand other people's perspectives, your ability to shift from different tasks quickly, what am I going to do in my classroom knowing that? So it's knowledge to increase your professional judgment, but it is not a list of things that you're doing or teaching. That's very context dependent. The other thing I wanted to say separately, if you don't mind, and I'd be remiss if I didn't share this, is, in terms of kids that we might be referring, like if we're talking about, we're concerned about maybe this should be tier 2, or is this, I think somebody mentioned special education referral earlier. I just want to say that the primary teachers do a lot of sifting through these issues early on, so that by the time they get up to you, a lot of them have already got their tiered intervention or their 504 or their IEP. So, we always say second grade's the magic year, because after the kids have been struggling in kindergarten and first grade, the parents kind of don't believe us. And then by second grade, they've heard it 3 years in a row. And now they're like, okay, yeah, we think we're on board with some further investigation, which is, adjacent to what we're talking about. But it's relevant because primary teachers have to sort of discriminate between they're 6, so they're going to hit people sometimes and not be able to control that. But they're hitting people all the time. Is that because their inhibitory process is not fully developed, or is that because there's something deeper going on? So we have a lot of thinking, understanding to do, and patience required there. And our students can't articulate to us, well, I have a really hard time paying attention. So that's why this knowledge is even more relevant for us. And, what you would see in my classroom would be in terms of what might be problematic. And in the book, we talk about executive dysfunction and some of the common things that might look like in the classroom. Maybe you inadvertently have a situation where you're really challenging your students' working memory and you don't realize it. You think you're being super helpful, but you're having the opposite effect. So what might that look like? And this goes again to why we needed the 2 books. The examples that Mitch would give for what that could look like in high school, in middle school, in upper elementary is going to be extremely different than what you're going to see for a kindergarten, first and second grader, even sometimes a third grader. For my kids, you're going to see, issues with sequencing stories, or you're going to see issues with getting along with peers in terms of not putting hands on somebody. You're going to see a lot more blurting out. You're going to see kids who have trouble learning to read. And so how do you make the distinction between, and this is for everybody, how do you make the distinction between, is there a content problem, or is the infrastructure of the learning breaking down in some way? Should we be looking at restructuring some things in our environment to support executive functions versus I'm going to put you in a, tier 2 reading group? Well, if reading's not the problem, then that's not going to help. So that was a lot of different things in one, but I felt like it was all worth pointing out.
Well, no, it was. And I think that the students, you walk in a classroom and they're exhibiting some behaviors. And you know that every year that's going to happen just because they're 6 years old. So what sort of things have you done to mitigate? You talked about to mitigate this executive functioning immaturity. I can't think of another word. So what are some things that you've done? You have mentioned about not giving all the directions at once. Mm-hmm. Are there other things that you could do that teachers could kind of tomorrow start doing?
Yeah, I mean, look around your classroom. What are your eyes drawn to? Or better yet, have someone else look around your classroom because you've already habituated to your physical environment. But look around, and if there are visual spots in your room that someone's eyes are drawn to, are they competing for places where you want your students to be paying attention? For example, I just bought I just bought some cool new reference posters. They're going to be great in 6 months when I teach that science unit, but I'm going to put them up now. Well, guess what the kids want to look at? And if that is in a place where they're going to see it during instruction and I don't want them to be looking at it, I'm just making it harder for them. I'm saying, I just hung these up, but don't look at them. So I think in that sense, looking around your environment and saying, okay, what do I have in here that's potentially distracting? Knowing that my kids have to inhibit their reflex to look at novel things. And so inhibition is really preventing yourself from acting on impulse. So I really want to look at, those donuts that look delicious, but I'm going to try not to. Well, then don't have the donuts there. Put them somewhere else where, you're not testing yourself. You're not testing your students. So I think just environmentally looking around. Now, it doesn't mean don't have those things. It means put those things in a place where, the kids see them when they're lined up. They're in the back of the room, or they're in a place that doesn't compete for attention when you're teaching. Activity-wise, primarily have a lot of stuff. If you're going to put a lot of stuff in front of your kids, you should be prepared that they want to touch it and play with it. And so you can either really be super strict and tell them don't touch it, and a lot of them are going to get in trouble probably because they're trying not to, but they can't help it. Or you can say, I'm going to take this out the second we need it. That's it. So those are some really simple things that don't require any kind of planning, any kind of preparation, just little tweaks to tighten up places in your practice where you might be siphoning off some of that learning power, some of your cognitive bandwidth that your kids are wasting on, administrative stuff, minutia in the classroom that doesn't affect learning.
How about the upper grades, Mitch? How do these things manifest if they're not developed well?
When we talk about this in the second book too, there's like the misconception of why it's behaviors, right, that we're spotting, but thinking it's willful defiance, or I just don't care, I'm apathetic, I'm disengaged. Now there could be a bunch of other factors there with bigger kids and younger kids for that matter that they're navigating, right? We don't know the chaos that a lot of kids navigate outside of school. So the more safe and predictable the environment can be, it can be a real haven. But yeah, that's what you're seeing in the inability to demonstrate goal-oriented behavior, the inability to get and stay organized. Like some of these things that you would just assume kids would know how to do, bigger kids. And as soon as we use that word assume, we're kind of dead in the water. We need to know and put routines in place all through K-12, but shaping the environment through our instruction and our routines that lead to better executive functioning, and not making the assumption that you're going to either figure this out on your own or that it's just going to, if you can't develop it, it's a deficit lens, right? Walking in. And then kids are used to that by the time they get to ninth grade, especially if they struggle academically. And I've seen it time and time again where students who get the opportunity to start to develop as learners this sense of agency, like I know how to do school. I might be struggling with the content still, but I'm not also struggling with the content and like I don't know how to do this. Like this is happening all around me. and other kids in the room seem to know how to do it, and I just don't. And when students start to develop that, you start to see success, academically as well, but that those behaviors and engagement start to shift in a really powerful way. And it's important that Sarah's kind of alluded to it a few times, that the beauty of this work in both books, but certainly in this second book that Sarah and I have just finished, it's not something else for teachers to do. It's almost like putting a pair of executive functioning glasses on and just analyzing your practice, in particular through the lens of can I decrease interference, increase automaticity, so that working memory, that cognitive bandwidth is there. And the lens is really through, and you hear Sarah talking about it again and again, even in our conversation, the environment, the physical, the visual, the auditory environment, like thinking about that. They're not saying you're doing things that are leading to off-task behavior or even executive dysfunction, but it's just a really interesting analysis. Same thing with my instruction. Is it too much? Is it too little? Same thing with my routine. So you're not going to find a teacher at any grade level that's looking for something else to do, right? I mean, it's tyranny of the urgent half the time, and it's just not a luxury that any educator has. So one thing that's really important to understand about this is that this book's not giving you something else to do. It's going to have a very small time footprint, but it's going to have a significant impact on you and your students as they start to develop, or we protect that executive functioning capacity.
Very true. And I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, you said.
No, I think it's knowledge that once you become aware of it, once you read about it, understand it a little bit, you start to see it in yourself too. Like, oh, or you're driving and you realize, I just looked at that sign. That sign's new. Like, how does my attention know to make me look over there? It's instinctual. It's reflexive. And you start to realize that there are bottom up reflexive behaviors that we just have as humans because of the way that our minds work. And, if you can't prevent yourself from turning towards something when you're driving, imagine, the 7-year-old that you're telling to pay attention to a word problem, and, you just put up a cool sign that blinks over in the corner. It's like they can't help but want to look at it. So it is not complicated. And I think that's really important to emphasize, that the way that we describe this in the book is not in a it's all empirically sound, and the research is sound, but we weren't interested in a bunch of research jargon for teachers. Teachers don't need that. But it is presented in a way that is accurate, but it's relevant to what we do every day. And so I think once you become aware of some of these things, you'll start to be like, oh, I see what's happening there. And then you start to have conversations like, well, we're going to put her in MTSS reading intervention, but I don't think that's the problem. I don't think decoding is the problem. I think she's having problems managing the individual sounds and then recoding. When it comes time to recode, her working memory's overwhelmed. So you start to uncover what else might be going on. And then in turn, you can think about, okay, well, what can I change? What can I tweak now that I have this in mind?
Hey, Sarah, the last thing you said, I think is real important for teachers, is that you have a framework for the executive functions. You have examples, lots of examples in the book. But many teachers, without knowing this, will just give up. Okay, let's get a special ed referral. So what you bring into this tier 1 instruction and your knowledge of the EFs is you are preventing a misdiagnosis. So do you ever have folks come to you? I mean, when I say that, I know every school has a student study type team. They have some sort of leadership thing to talk about issues, just like we're talking about out of control. You didn't say out of control kids, but I'm going to say it. That until they have that, we are going to be burdening other systems, other support systems within the school because of the way we've labeled the kid.
I mean, everybody's got attention deficit, not the diagnosis, but, we all have less attentional bandwidth, and we don't need to talk about why that might be. But I don't think, and I say this as a teacher, I was in the classroom today, and I lose my patients all the time, but we have to remember they're in this huge surge of development, and executive function is what drives attention, what controls it, what tells it what to focus on, and all at the same time, what to ignore. And so if we see that our kids are struggling with that, we can, number one, say, what do I have in my environment? Or am I overloading working memory? What am I doing that I could maybe change to support that? Or, we understand that this is developmental, and we're going to, I feel like I just said a bad word. It's developmental because we hear that too much as teachers, but these cognitive processes, they really are developmental. And so we can't diagnose everybody or tell everybody or say, very discreetly to the parents, like, you might want to take him to the doctor. I think that's where we get into trouble. And we have to remember they're active. A lot of them have to purposefully tell themselves not to be because they want to be active. So we have to toe the line of being mindful of where they are developmentally and not insinuating that they all have, attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity, or now some of them do. And some of them will need special services or a referral to your problem solving team, but I don't think we should jump to conclusions too quickly.
You think I'm going to say this a little bit differently than you did, but to me, it's just isolating variables. Is it this? Is it this? Is it one of these three core functions? Is it these other ones? But unless you control that, I could just see going to, what did you call it? A student assist team? What did you call it? A referral to, if you refer to kids.
Your problem solving team. Yeah.
Problem solving team. That there, it seems to me on that team, we always strive to have representation, of the teacher, special services, interventionist, et cetera. But if you don't take care of what we're talking about right now, we're always going to be confounded by the data that says a kid's not performing.
And, your listeners will know who are in the classroom, the first thing that you're going to get if you do bring up a concern to the team, or whoever you bring those concerns to, they're going to say, well, have you tried this, and this, and what, and, have you documented, and, we're going to try 6 more weeks of this or that. If you can go and say, I've tried reducing the working memory load, basically you have more tools at your disposal to try. So if you can go and say, look, I understand a bit about executive functions. I've noticed that, he has trouble inhibiting his impulses when he wants to say something. I think just showing that you've gone beyond what, your colleague down the hall may have done because you've taken it upon yourself to learn a little bit more about, how your kids learn.
How widespread is this information in your school, Sarah, about executive function?
It is only in the context of special education. Does it ever come up?
Okay. How about you, Mitch? What variables that you try to isolate or get teachers to try that might be different than the usual order of business?
Interestingly, the older the grades, the older we get, the older the students get, the more the conversation just seems to naturally shift to content. And you've probably heard the saying, you can ask a first grade teacher what they teach, and you can ask let's say a high school teacher. And if you ask a high school teacher, they're going to say, well, I teach English. And if you ask the first grade teacher, they teach students. It's just this different space. And the problem, and it comes back to those assumptions or expectations, is what you start to see is a lack of routine, it just becomes content driven. And that's not just to say, and that's not to say that's wrong. The things we learn are important, hopefully, but it's not just willy nilly, and that doesn't matter. But it's more of a lack of any of this and just kind of assuming, hey, you're in high school now or you're in college now. The same conversations and the same behaviors that even Sarah's talking about in first grade. I met with a dean in college yesterday, and they're like, we don't know what to do. These are the behaviors we're seeing in the classroom, these kind of underdeveloped, if you will, executive functions. So the work that I like to encourage with the big kids is basically working on Gene, like, okay, let's consider the environment. How do we establish routines and instructional strategies that, of course, allow you to teach your content, but embed practice with and exposure to these executive functions. So starting to shape the environment in ways that leads to better executive functioning. And that's one part, these EF lens, like that kid may be acting that way. That big kid may be that way because, and you think it's this. And just like Sarah's saying, well, maybe it's this. Maybe some small adjustments and you start to see things change, behaviors change, progress happening. And it can't, the importance of this work, and I hope every primary and kinder and even pre-K teacher reads this book, because I was recently the privilege of being a keynote for a state level MTSS conference, and the person who introduced me said, Mitch is going to talk all about Tier 1 in his keynote. And, we're here at an MTSS conference, so the mind automatically goes to Tier 2 and Tier 3, which it shouldn't. We got to keep Tier 1 in there. And he said, I kind of fell out of my chair before I walked up there, that we have districts in our state will remain unnamed, of course, but that have upwards of 60 to 70% referral rates to Tier 2, Tier 3, and special ed. And the system just can't, it's not built for that. That's no longer intervention, right? That's like complete desperation. And the fact is, if it goes unaddressed, usually just because of a lack of maybe understanding around this work, you are going to have colleges saying, I had a college professor a couple years ago, like they don't know how to manage classroom management's not a thing. We're like ninth grade, that's part of the deal, right? And she's like, I had a student stand up on his desk yesterday. Like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I don't have any training in any of this. And I'm not saying that's one isolated event and you can tie that to executive dysfunction. It's just a way to put an exclamation point on the importance of these conversations and this work, starting all the way back with the 3 and 4 year olds.
Yeah, and I think that's a message. There's a through line, even beginning with parents. I think, would the parents benefit from this book?
Yes.
Because I think it's important when you have a parent meeting, be able to come to some understanding. And if you don't have this as part of the context, the EFs, then it's all about preference. Well, I don't like to teach that way. Well, you've got your kids in groups. I don't know if you've ever noticed how many of them are not, it may just be too distracting for them to be sitting next to somebody, and I know that happens because if I'm ever with Sarah, I do not sit next to Sarah, because between the two of us, we're just going to be distracted. It doesn't matter how good the session is. Doesn't matter how good the session is. So I think that's the other thing that's important for folks to know, that you want to take a look at both your new K3 book and the 312 book to kind of get an idea of what those behaviors are that maybe a teacher can't even explain because they don't know what they are. And then many times parents don't believe what the school is saying.
Yeah. And on that note, I've had, we had several people read the manuscript, and I will say that every single reader that was a parent of a school-age child said, I had so many ahas as a parent. Yeah. So this wasn't written for parents, but just the few that have read it have already said, like, oh, wow, this was so eye-opening. I need to read this not as, school administrator or an educator, but as a parent. I'm seeing my own kids in this book, basically. And I think, to Mitch's point about the upper grades being so content focused, the benefit we have in primary is we have our kids all day long. So I'm with the same 21 kids from the moment they walk in, barring lunch and their special, what music or library or whatever. I'm with them all day, so I can be consistent all day long. They're not going to another class and getting a different message and different routines and different expectations. But along those lines, they're also getting their feet wet in their formal schooling. So they're learning to read. They're learning to do basic computations, all the foundations that's going to take them through the rest of their school career, which makes it all the more important that they have successful experiences early on so that when they get to Mitch, when they get to, middle school, high school, they, number one, don't have a terrible attitude about themselves as a student because they're just never organized, or, they already have that aversion because things are just hard or difficult or they're forgetful. And number two, because we're seeing kids that are in high school and still can't read. And so we lay the foundation academically, and we can also support the foundation for our students as they see themselves as learners, as well as just, benefiting them academically. Their learning time will be maximized if you are considering what you know about executive functions in the classroom.
And they're going to know a lot more after they read your book and Mitch's book. One of the things that I saw, God, this is years ago now, we were working with all the incarcerated youth in LA County, and we were going to all the camps and working with the teachers. We've observed lessons, and the kids, but you don't have to worry about some things when they're locked up because they don't get to keep a pencil. They don't get to, they're all counted, back and forth. But I'll never forget a kid who the lesson was a good lesson, and the kid was really excited about the lesson. But the teacher wouldn't answer a question. And so all of a sudden it escalated, it escalated to the point where they're sent out because they're disrupting the class. They got to go to probation and talk about what's going on. But it was, real clear. They just didn't know how to do that. There are constraints in being a statement. You can't just yell out and, like adults, we have a little bit more agency, or is that the right thing?
Self-control.
Self-control.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. Well, guys, obviously could talk forever, but before we go, do you have any questions for me?
I do. I guess it's a question. Yeah, I guess it's a question. I want to hear the story. I know you like the genesis, the founding of your work, Gene, is predicated on the experience you had with a teacher, and then you guys came back together years later, if I read this correctly.
Well, what is the thing? Yeah, okay.
A lot of the work you do?
Well, I'll tell you, I always wanted to be a football coach. I didn't want to teach. I didn't want to have any. I just wanted to be a football coach. And I played football in college, and I came back in summer, and I talked to my old high school football coach. I said, I'd love to help you, in the two-a-days when we come back. And he said, sure, that'd be great. We'll need to talk about that. So here I am. I was a hot shot quarterback. I played quarterback in college, and I'm thinking I'm going to work with the quarterbacks, right? My coach says to me, you're going to take the outside linebackers. And I said, I don't know anything about, and so he brought me through the footwork step. And every day, that's what I practice with the defensive ends and the tight ends, how to handle that. But we couldn't do it until we had the basics. Here's your footwork. Here's what you're going to do with your hands. So to me, that was the first time that I realized that I could teach these things if I broke them down into a manner that was digestible for my clients, which at that time were these football players. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And that's why I always ask folks if they have an athletic or performance background. How about you, Mitch? Do you have a Soccer. Okay. Yeah.
I went to my 35th reunion, and my soccer coach from high school was there, who was one of two adults in my life outside of parents that just left an indelible mark.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, he never grew up playing soccer, but he grew up coaching and he grew up teaching. And so he approached the whole sport in a way that made him really, really successful. So.
Yeah. How about you, Sarah? What performance do you have in your back? Really? If you don't want to say, you don't have to say.
Performance. Well, I perform every day in front of my 6 and 7 year olds, formerly cheerleading.
Yeah, which you got to break it all down, and so that's what I found. I found the effective teachers have something in their background to say, just like when I learned how to play guitar, this is just like I learned how to do. That's my guy. And help me to shout out to him, Larry Welsh. He was he might still be the winningest coach in California percentage wise, high school.
Wow.
And so anyway, that's where I learned that.
Okay, I'm glad you shared that. I read that and I was like, oh, that's what I want to know about. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think we all have those experiences, of being to do something. And many of us have the experience of being so frustrated because it wasn't good enough. The instruction wasn't good enough. And then what happens? My inhibitions and my EF are all screwed up as a crap.
That's exactly right. Actually, a quick anecdote on that note that I could bring on it. So my dad tried to teach me how to drive stick shift while backing up out of his incline driveway. And needless to say, I never learned, ended in tears, and I never learned how to drive. So talk about scaffold and, knowing your audience.
Content audience. A little too much content, right?
Yeah.
I taught my daughter in the parking lot with no one else around, and she nailed it.
And he was so mad at me. He's like, "You're going to crash through the house." I said, "Forget this."
Stick. Oh, okay. No, but how about you? Yeah.
There's a truth there, and that's what happens with kids in school.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do it, especially by the time they reach me. And I had to change that narrative, like, oh, you can. You are capable. It's that how we develop this capacity to do these things we have to be thoughtful about developing executive functions. So.
Yeah. Shout out to my dad. He's amazing in plenty of other ways. Sorry, Dad.
Shout out, Dad.
That's funny. Here we go. So, the name of the book, Sarah, K3.
Executive Functions for Every K3 Classroom.
All right. And the first book.
There's a subtitle, Sarah.
Go ahead. You take the subtitle.
Promoting Self-Regulation for a Strong Start. Book number 1, what we refer to them as the Blue Book, but same name, Gene. Executive Functions for Every 3 through 12 Classroom, creating safe and predictable learning environments.
Sounds terrific, guys. I wish we had more time, but we'll run into each other again soon, and we'll have a chance. Good luck on your book. I know that it's available for pre-order also on Amazon now.
Yep, Amazon and Corwin, you can pick it up. Yeah.
So all good. Any last words, folks?
No, just thanks, Gene.
Gosh, thank you guys. Thank you guys. We will talk to you soon.
All right. My favorite person named Gene. Talk to you later.
If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focus Adaptable Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles.